Citizens of America, the so-called Western forces of Texas and California have suffered a very great defeat at the hands of the United States military.
I saw Civil War the other night and, it didn't really float my boat. The film opens with the President of the United States making a statement from the White House that the war is coming to an end. The Western forces are being defeated. Cut to the photojournalist Kirsten Dunst playing Lee, who is in New York and decides with media companions to head to DC to interview the president. They encounter various groups and witness some horrors, taking photos along the way. They arrive in DC and witness the Western forces break into the White House and kill the president in cold blood. It's not really a war movie, it's more like a road trip from New York with various mostly violent encounters. I understand and even respect the attempt not to overtly involve modern day politics, but there are suggestions that the president is the bad guy and the photojournalists are allied to the Western forces even though they claim to be impartial. It is not clear the background to the conflict, but on reflection and during the movie it was difficult to make sense of it all because of the lack of motivation for such brutality of the characters that they meet along the way. In other words, the brutality is clear, but the motivation behind it for such brutality is not. The ever important why. I understand it stemmed from a desire to portray the senselessness of war, but in order to understand the war, it has to make sense. What was the motivation? We know who the bad guy is, but who is the leader of the Western forces? A state governor, an elected official, a Chinese general, a celebrity, a Silicon Valley billionaire, a Hollywood mogul, or even, God forbid, an actor? For example, the two men who were being tortured in the barn early in the road trip, who were they and what had they done? Had they incinerated a school bus of children, or had they just expressed a different opinion? Another example, the sniper in the house shooting at the soldiers on the road. Were the soldiers the invading enemy? And there were some glaring absences. Where was the internet and social media? Surely people would be passing news around, citizen journalists galore. But no, nothing. Surely photographers would want to report from the front line as it happened, literally streaming wars. The photojournalists wanted to be at the centre of the action, but they were not sending anything back to their media organisations as far as we could see. They were shooting on film stock, not digital. Who does that now? It was photojournalism from 50 years ago, as I heard one audience member say on leaving. As I said, no internet. There were no people in the streets. Where were they? The streets were empty. Was the food and water still being delivered? How? From where? The president was not in the White House bunker, but in the Oval Office. Why? Why did they refer to the president as the president? If he had been the enemy, why not take his name in vain, spit it out in contempt? They were still respecting the office of the president, yet storming the premises. Anomalies of character. So Kirsten Dunst, in her role as Lee, and her remaining companions arrive at the White House, and as the hardened photojournalist Lee was at the most important point in her career, she crumbled while her teenage companion is happily snapping away. The teenager, in fact I think she was 23 years old, is responsible for the death of her idol Lee, but as soon as Lee is shot accidentally at point blank range, the teenager gets up and races away. This after knowing Lee, her hero, for 4 days. Joel, the other companion, railed and shouted at the sky when the fat reporter Sammy was shot along with a few other friends. But when his best friend, Kirsten Dunst, Lee, was shot, he strolls away and poses for photos in the Oval Office. Neither he nor the teenager attempt to pull Lee, Kirsten Dunst, out of the way or even offer life-saving treatment. And there was some other weird stuff. It was a conventional militarized war. Why was it not a digital war? Shutting down the internet, control of modern vehicles, using software, access to water, to electricity, to food, to the delivery of food would be the easiest way to starve out a city. A physical and digital siege of the city. Food, water, power. So in summary, it was a road trip, not a war movie. And back to my bugbear motivation, or the lack of motivation. It would have been good to have the motivation of the characters so you could make a judgment call on the brutality of the Western forces as unarmed White House staff tried to surrender but were shot dead in cold blood. While I sort of understand the effort to remove politics from the story and from the various scenes, it left a huge empty hole that you would hoped would have been answered. But no, motivation was really needed, otherwise you could not engage intellectually after a point. The suggestion was that the cause or the basis of the war was political in nature, but what if the Civil War had another premise? Intergenerational, the old versus the young. In the US, the average living wage has not risen in real terms, I believe, since the 1960s. That would create some tension. Or more generally, the wealthy versus the poor, or the urban versus the suburban versus the rural, or keep it political, but make both sides of the argument compelling. So there came a point I couldn't really engage on an intellectual level. I disengaged. It didn't make sense. Characters set to behave one way, but then they behave another way. No internet, and I couldn't understand the logic of fighting a conventional war in this way. So there you go, my boat did not float. It could have been so different. Anyway, nobody asked me. Until next time, like, subscribe and all that rubbish.